Max, welcome. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be
Yeah,
here.
of course. So I think we've both been trying to track, some of the election rigging activities that are going on, but it's actually a lot to keep track of. And then there's all the speculation of, okay, what is this all building towards? So in your opinion, based on your expertise, are you starting to get a sense of the sort of plan that is being and the plot that is being unfolded here in advance of the 2026 midterms?
Yeah, I think from what we're seeing, things are starting to take shape. And, I just want to take a step back and say, I think, this is unprecedented. Like the amount of attacks just at all coming at the independence of fair elections. Starting with kind of the biggest and the most obvious, you have the Republicans just blatantly trying to rig the maps in any state they possibly can before 2026. It started in Texas. It's moved on to a couple other states, Missouri. Indiana's moving forward. Florida is expected to follow suit. Kansas and Ohio are also expected after that. And so, they're not even hiding it. They're being very loud and clear about what they're doing. And, it tracks back to, in my opinion, they know they have been governing in a way that's very unpopular with the majority of Americans. And so they're doing all they can to essentially avoid the accountability of the American people.
Do you fear that there's a possibility that Trump goes full, like, Insurrection Act, national emergency, I'm not even going to allow elections? Like, is that on the table, or is it more the standard stuff that you're talking about where they try to basically put their thumb on the scale and make preparations beforehand so that they can, bias it in their favor?
Well, I think it's coming from all angles, and we can kind of get into the specifics on more of those. But to your question, of course, the New York Times did reveal leaks last week in a big investigative story that showed just that, what you're talking about, like this idea of sort of drumming up fake evidence to allow the president to declare a national emergency. I guess the idea would be, our national security is at risk because our elections are at risk. It's bullshit. And the folks that are talking about this are embedded in powerful federal agencies. And so, even though this would likely be challenged in court and it seems illegal and unconstitutional and probably wouldn't go forward, it's a really good example of how far they're willing to go, how far they're willing to push things. So, to your question about the Insurrection Act, I think we've seen both Trump and sort of like Stephen Miller, people are calling him the shadow president, talking about this openly. And they seem foaming at the mouth, really, to do that. Whether or not they will, I think remains to be seen. But point is, there's an array of threats from sort of the classic gerrymandering, map rigging, all the way to some pretty unprecedented stuff at the federal level, using and abusing executive power.
Yeah, so let's, why don't you lay out for us the different fronts that you see them operating on and how we should think about it?
Sure. So, I want to take us back to the gerrymandering efforts. We're seeing it widespread across these Republican states, and Democrats are starting to respond. Of course, we've all seen California respond really forcefully, really frankly, which has been great. Virginia just announced they're going to redraw maps. And there are a couple of other states that are considering it. I know Illinois, Jeffries just went there this week, and Governor J.B. Pritzker seems to understand the logic behind changing the maps in response to the Republicans' efforts. But this could all be supercharged by the Supreme Court. Right now, they just reheard a case about 2 weeks ago called Louisiana v. Calais. And that really threatens Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which is the main safeguard against racially discriminatory maps. So if that falls, which court watchers, legal experts that really pay close attention to this stuff, they expect the far-right Supreme Court justices to strike down Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. That would supercharge this Republican scheme. It would allow them to draw 19 additional safe seats. My organization, Fair Fight, actually partnered with another group called Black Voters Matter Fund, and we did an analysis. We put out a comprehensive report showing the states where this would be possible and really laying out the absurdity of the argument here. That's sort of the big map rigging effort that the Republicans are taking on right now.
And just to bolster you on that, I saw Nate Cohn at the New York Times did an analysis as well and found that of the plausible redistricting, I think his estimate was like plausibly they could probably get to like a dozen seats with the Supreme Court decision easily, because you do get into like, you know, Republican incumbents don't want to have their district screwed up. So there is some like political tension there as well. So his estimate is that they could redraw 12 seats that would go from D to R, and that the landscape would be shifted enough that it would require Democrats to win a 5-point popular vote victory in order to take the House. Now, 5 points is, you know, that's a wave election. That's like a 2008. That's like a 2010. So again, it's not like it's impossible, but it makes it very, very difficult. And then when you add on top of that, okay, what are they, maybe what we could talk about next, and you know, coming from Georgia, like you have had an up close view of this, is one of the executive orders that Trump signed required states send in their voter rolls. Originally, this was under DOJ, to Elon's DOJ, but even though Elon is out of the government, these efforts have continued. They've asked 30 states to send in their voter rolls to the DOJ, and they've sued some 8 states demanding that the voter rolls be turned over. So what do you think that they are working on there? And, you know, what are some of the personnel that they brought into the administration likely to do with that information?
Yeah, so real quick on the NATCO New York Times study, just want to point out it is essentially identical to the study that my organization released, but we just analyzed more states than they did.
Okay.
So I feel very confident that our 19-seat analysis still holds. But, you know, talking about the executive order and, you know, what that would mean, what does that reveal about their plan? You got to take a step back and sort of look at it from a broader view. So, you know, you have sort of these these operatives being appointed in key federal agencies. So take that national emergency we talked about earlier. That idea was floated by someone named Heather Honey, and she is an operative from a far-right organization called the Election Integrity Network. And her, a couple of others from that group have now been installed in federal positions, and they are, you know, pushing the boundaries, testing ideas like a fake national emergency based on the 2020 election lies about, you know, Trump's loss. But they also are trying to install folks at the state and the county level as well. And so here in Georgia, we've seen direct evidence of that. Fulton County, it's the largest, most Democratic, blackest county in Georgia. Of course, still a critical battleground state, and has a big U.S. Senate race coming up where, you know, Republicans see Senator John Ossoff as like one of the most at-risk senators, like one of their biggest opportunities to pick up a seat. So they want to install these operatives on the Fulton County election board here. And these folks have a proven history of spreading false claims, challenging voters' eligibility, and really just trying to mess with independent elections. And so one of those people is actually already on the board, and her seat is up for renewal. And in 2024, she was kind of part of a group that worked with the state election board members here in Georgia to change election rules just a couple of months before the election in a way that was designed to tilt the scales in favor of Trump and Republicans. They passed a slew of new rules, but the biggest and the most concerning one seemed to be one that would allow local county election officials to delay, to block, to essentially obstruct the certification of the election. And so it's a critical example of how sprawling this network is and how they could be working in coordination now with the federal government. And last thing on this is that these 2 nominees for the Fulton County Board of Elections here, they're still kind of tied up in a legal battle. It's not finalized yet, but one of them has been openly talking about helping the DOJ to investigate Fulton County's 2020 ballots if he's put on the board. So, you know, it's pretty clear these folks want to drum up their conspiracy theories, their false claims, and then use them in concert with federal power to sort of drum up fake evidence that there was something wrong with the 2020 election. And therefore, we need to do something different moving forward to 2026, 2028, and beyond.
Yeah, and he keeps talking about it. That's something I noticed, too, is that he still, to this day, all the time, he talks about 2020. In fact, I want to read a Trump post and then get your reaction to it. I'll even do the voice for you. What's worse, the NBA players cheating at cards and probably much else, or the Democrats cheating on elections? The 2020 presidential election being rigged and stolen is a far bigger scandal. Look what happened to our country when a crooked moron became our president. We now know everything. I hope the DOJ pursues this with as much gusto as befitting the biggest scandal in American history. If not, it will will happen again, including the upcoming midterms. No mail-in or early voting. Yes to voter ID. Watch how totally dishonest the California prop vote is. Millions of ballots being shipped. Get smart, Republicans, before it's too late. So he's almost like, tipping people off there. Here's where we're going to fuck everything up. Here's where we're going to try to rig things.
Yeah, and first I'll say, fantastic impression. It's giving me like an impression of the Trevor Noah Trump impression, which is still great. But first I say, projection much. What is this guy talking about here? There were dozens of court cases, there were audits, there was election officials and elected officials from across both sides of the political aisle, and people in Trump's own first administration that said there was no widespread fraud that messed with the results of the 2020 election. So, they're playing the hits. They're just regurgitating the same thing that they've been doing. But the difference now is that they have the full force of the federal government, the executive branch behind them, and they are willing to push the boundaries of what they can do. They're trying to show us that they're willing to test how far they can go.
Yeah, and one of the things he mentioned there is the California prop vote, which is the one that voters have to first say, like, yes, we want to redistrict. And it looks like it's overwhelmingly going to pass. And so he's already announced he's sending election monitors both to New Jersey and to California. How does that fit into this broader picture?
Well, it's just part of the way they're weaponizing the Department of Justice, really. And it comes straight from Project 2025. Project 2025 lays out using the DOJ in ways just like this. So, you have Attorney General Pam Bondi gutting the voting rights section of the DOJ, either reassigning or firing career attorneys, kind of dropping all the Biden-era cases that were left standing. And like you mentioned earlier, they're suing states for access to their voter data. And in some states, they've even tried to request access to the voting machines. So they're pressuring local officials. They're trying to push for more. And it really is just an example of how the DOJ is now being used as an arm to sort of further these disproven conspiracy theories. And, if you look at it from a broader view, it's very in line with sort of the propaganda apparatus way that this regime is operating. It's crazy. We're almost at the point where it's almost safe to say anything that comes from Trump, anything that comes from the DOJ, the opposite is likelier to be true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true. And what do you make of the fact that Dominion vote? Everybody remember back in 2020, there were all these Dominion voting machine conspiracies, and Fox News had to pay a settlement because they lied about Dominion voting conspiracies, and supposedly Hugo Chavez's ghost, rigged them or something like that. Well, Dominion voting has now been sold to a Republican operative, effectively, like a partisan Republican. They
changed the name to Liberty Vote, too.
Liberty Vote, and this is half of the voting machines in the country are Dominion voting machines. So is that something that we should be concerned about? How are you thinking about that?
You think?
I think it definitely raises alarm bells. I would just say, we don't know a ton right now in terms of details of what this is going to eventually look like. Of course, they changed the name, which seems to be a big signal of something. But I would just want to not perpetuate any baseless conspiracy theories now until we know a little bit more. But I would absolutely agree it's something to watch closely, and we are. And sort of the voting rights space at all is watching it closely.
Yeah. The other thing that I've been just trying to play out is on the theme of Trump and all the insane things he says, right? So he's already saying mail-in ballots are fraudulent, the California vote's fraudulent, they're always talking about undocumented immigrants voting, which of course we know doesn't actually happen. So trying in advance to discredit the vote. And then I'm just trying to play out, okay, well, this is a man we already know tried to steal one election, so we know this is all on the table for him. Let's say Democrats are able to win a majority in the House. And he just says, no, I don't believe it. I think this was rigged. This was fake. And you've got these these county boards that are stacked with election deniers, stop the steal nut jobs, and they refuse to certify in key races. How does this all play out? And what does it do to the country if you just no longer have widespread acceptance that the results are what the results are? It feels like that's not something that we just as a nation can really sustain.
Yeah, I mean, it's very problematic. It's very worrisome. You're absolutely right. They have laid the groundwork here to obstruct certifications and sort of challenge elections on the back end. Their approach is sort of piecemeal in that sense. They may be in a couple scattered counties here and there in Georgia and other states, especially across the South. But, a lot of these certification processes move from the counties to sort of the statewide elected folks or appointed. So like, the Secretary of State, maybe even the governor in some states. And so there are different safeguards in place in different states that can address some of these issues. So it's not really like a black and white thing. There's a gray area, right? It's like, where can they obstruct and how far can they take it? So I don't think it's like a closed book or a foregone conclusion on that point, but we know those problems already exist. And luckily, a lot of the folks, those secretaries of states, those governors are aware of that. They saw some issues around that in 2020 in Georgia, Coffee County, they tried to not certify. Their efforts were really just kind of squashed and brushed aside. So these things can be fought, even though the groundwork has been laid. And in that regard, I would just hope that our elected officials stay vigilant and stay committed to, their oaths of office, protecting sort of the votes and the freedoms of every American.
What do you make of the Trump regime mandating that all state voting data has to be given to the feds?
So I think it tracks back to what we discussed earlier, right? Sort of using federal power to kind of foment false claims and push them as truth. So the plan, like I just mentioned earlier, with Fulton County folks in the election board there, if they want to work in concert with the DOJ, if the DOJ is getting all of the data, right, they can sort it, they can manipulate it, they can play with it. They will try to tell whatever story they want to then serve as a sort of like false reason to push for changes on a wide scale. And so, Crystal, you mentioned that executive order earlier.
Yeah.
It could even be something like, hey, look what we found. Look what the DOJ has finally uncovered. The deep state was hiding it. Now we need another executive order, right? And maybe it's the one that he alluded to just 3 days after Putin told him he should ban mail voting. It's honestly embarrassing. It's humiliating for a president to be just repeating what a dictator tells him to do. But, we might be there, right? And so we could see another executive order coming, which calls for much sweeping, much larger changes. We could see them try the national emergency. I think the DOJ and DHS are a critical part of this plan. It looks that way anyway, to sort of use whatever data they can find to muddle things up, confuse people, and push it out through their propaganda apparatus.
We also have seen reporting, and Pete Hegseth refused to deny this, that they're building a 50-state rapid response force using National Guard military that could be, deployed in anywhere across the country. And lo and behold, it's going to be ready by April of 2026, so in time for the midterm elections. How are you thinking about that development?
Yeah, well, they're already kind of soft playing that now, right? They're doing like a soft launch of that. They have, of course, ICE raids across the country sort of just unleashed, right? Civil rights violations, violence, fear tactics, but you also have the National Guard. And then on top of that, you have the latest sort of these election monitors. So it really is clear they're trying to create sort of a chilling environment. And, if you look demographically at who these people are that are being targeted by ICE raids, being impacted by this atmosphere of fear, it's largely Black and brown folks. And, who are those folks usually more likely to vote for?
Right. Yeah. There was a South Carolina judge who blocked the state of South Carolina from sending all the voting data to the feds. And then a couple weeks later, her house was burned down after being targeted by, I forget the name of the female election official who targeted her on Twitter. I'm blanking on that person's name. But was it Harmeet Dillon?
I don't remember.
Okay. Well, anyway, her house was burned down and her family barely escaped with their lives. Is this a thing that you worry about? Because I certainly worry about it. That you have these very clear marching orders coming from the Trump regime. Many of them, I would argue, probably illegal. And then, if you have judges do the right thing, if you have officials who stand up to the nonsense, they're sort of like a target on their back. And, there's violence done against them. Is this something that you fear on a more broad scale? Hey guys, we had on Max Flugarth, who's an election expert, and he walked through with us exactly how Trump is going to try to steal 2026 and 2028 and what they've already done. So you don't want to miss this. This was a super important episode. Sign up below on Substack to see the whole thing.